This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner Paul Weiss and contributing partners National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to This Week in the Boardroom. I'm Scott Cutler, Executive Vice President with NYSE Euronext. I'm joined today by my guest, TK Kerstetter, President of Corporate Board Member. TK, welcome.
Well, I assume that I'm the guest because there's been a groundswell of support on having me move from the host side to the more intellectual guest side. So I am happy to be sitting in the guest seat.
Nonetheless, I'm glad that you're in that seat. Today's topic is the board's role in balancing risk and growth. And I actually think this is a really important topic today, particularly because striking the right balance between risk and growth really can separate the winners and the losers long term for corporations. My perspective on this is actually shaped by my own experience in the Silicon Valley, where innovation and the threat of innovation destroys companies and creates new opportunities. And so this topic is particularly relevant, I think, to my own experience. And on the other hand, boards have the responsibility to balance growth and innovation with risk. Now, last week you hosted a conference with the Russell 2000 here at the NYSE, and the topic was around risk and growth. What were the observations of the attendees?
Well, first of all, it was a great topic for that group of companies because they're, always mindful of, they're in a lot of those Russell 2000 companies are in that growth stage. So to me, it's a very important part. And first of all, there's an overall dynamic about risk. Risk, for some reason, has become a bad word. It's a four-letter word, yet it has been a part of business forever. We have been managing it forever. There has been reputational risk forever, okay? The difference is 40 years ago, if a wheel fell off a car in California, no one really knew about that, except the people that maybe watch TV there. But today, a wheel falls off in California. A car manufacturer has that go global or viral immediately, okay? So any little incident is now put into this basket called risk, but it shouldn't change the overall strategy risk that somebody is managing. And somewhere, Scott, I think we need to separate those. What this conference did is it took a look at what directors should be worried about relative to risk. It's difficult for them to worry about if somebody gets coffee that's too hot spilled on them, and that's not the kind of risk I think that we're necessarily talking about. We're talking about something bigger that actually deals with culture. So we spent time on what a director's duties should be, how they can impact the culture, and work with management to make sure that they're promoting growth within this, what today is a very severe risk environment.
Well, one recent article I read today compared culture to a cloud. You can see it, but it's tough to grasp. And I think that culture is something that, from a management perspective, the tone is set from the top. How is it that a company balances that risk of creating a culture of innovation and balancing that against the other risk that places on the business?
Well, because it's a cloud, as you say, it becomes, for some people, it becomes a soft issue, okay? I personally, if that's felt at a company that culture is a soft issue, that is a company that I don't want to invest in, because to me, culture is all about the decisions that employees make when nobody's around. I mean, you're setting a culture for your employees to make decisions. And believe me, employees have a wonderful communication network that is far superior to anything that could be developed, through technology or whatever. And that is, they are influenced, no matter what you say as a board or management, they are influenced by actions. Let me give you an example or two of that. FCPA, taking bribes or offering bribes in a third world country. It is very important that the culture be set that while you have very aggressive sales goals, those goals are not meant to be reached by violating FCPA rules to put the whole company at risk.
Right.
If employees see that somebody gets promoted and gets incentives by cutting corners, I guarantee you, no matter what management says, they will operate the way that they can get ahead and get incentives. So same is true when you look at risk takers. If you say we're going to be an innovative company, and the first person that comes out of the box in their division takes some appropriate risk, and you slap their hands for taking that risk, do you think anybody's going to stick their neck out after that to be an innovative company? So that is controlled by management and the board, and they play huge roles in how they respond to those situations on what one's culture is, and then subsequently what one's balance is.
It's interesting. From my observation, we see companies that have embraced this notion of innovation all the way down into the employee base, where management has set a tone from the top. We want to hear innovative ideas. We arm employees with creating those ideas. But it seems to me that ultimately, management is responsible for putting in place the culture of innovation. And then the board has to step back and understand, how are we going to measure the potential impact of that? How do we measure performance? How do we reward this? And then ultimately, does this strategy impact negatively on the potential risks of the business? Take, for example, just this last week, where a company like Netflix has made a big strategic change in the way they are selling their service to the customers. There's an innovative approach to what they're doing, but it's also had big risk on the company. So what is the best advice that a board can have in terms of balancing that need between management and how you balance that against risk?
Well, I agree with you that it's really management is going to set the tone. The board isn't around enough, in all the day-to-day things to do that. But there's things that the board should be doing. Probably the most important thing is sort of to identify limits, okay? To identify what is our risk appetite with management, to be able to say, here's where we're comfortable on taking risks. We don't want to bet the company, but people need to understand, okay? Let's take that FCPA example again. At the conference, somebody said they call the senior people in from across the globe and say, listen, we know we have very aggressive sales goals for you, but this is the board, and we're telling you we want to make sure that you do it the right way. Well, when that person goes back, they're telling their people, I just met with the board. And so the board has been able to put a clear stamp on the type of behavior that they want them to use globally, okay? So I thought the fact that the board participated with them was very significant. The second thing I would say that the board can do, and this is a great opportunity, because anybody that's been a CEO knows, it seems like your day is putting out fires. I mean, it's difficult to take a step back when you're always on the go, always, meeting after meeting, the news, analysts, you name it. The directors have the ability to take a step back and say, what have we created? What environment have we created for employee behavior? And most importantly then, what is our compensation structure doing to reward the behavior that we want to have? Clear example for that. If we say that we want to reward growth and sales and whatever, if it turns out that anybody that makes a mistake or has a bad project, that they aren't promoted, yet people that do have safe audits and don't reach out at all are the ones that are getting promoted or getting pay, something's wrong with your compensation structure. You're promoting a behavior that's completely different than what you're communicating to your organization. So the directors can take a step back, rise above the trees, and take a look at, is there balance? Do we have balance?
So it seems as though we need to make sure that a board is instilling the notion that innovation is important. You have to align compensation to that innovation challenge. And then you have to have a way to understand the risks that are created as a result of those structures. What else are companies employing today to balance risk and reward?
The other thing that I thought was fascinating that came out of the conference as well is there were two companies there that made a point of saying, whenever our management team is doing planning, we make sure that all the business units, when they present their plans, that they present a risk analysis with their plans. In other words, there isn't a separate group that's sort of looking at risk, okay? They do go through that process, but most importantly, they make sure that all those business units know this is the kind of thought process that you have. We still want you to reach. We don't want you to be afraid of risk, but we want you to do a risk analysis as part of your strategic plan. And I think the further you can push that mindset down in an organization, the better off the organization is going to be.
We talked a little bit earlier this year about new SEC disclosure requirements around risk. And those disclosure requirements require a company to disclose how risk is handled, how it's measured, and communicate that in the proxy statement. Do you think you've seen any changes in terms of how that's been disclosed?
Well, to me, just like many of the other disclosures, the disclosures get lawyered up. If you were an investor, you're really not going to get much out of that, in my opinion, okay? But the good part is, if these disclosures are creating the kinds of discussion that needs to go on in companies relative to this, then I'm okay with the disclosure if that's the roundabout way to get companies to do this. But when you look at the disclosures themselves, same is true for experiences and qualifications of directors, same is true in diversity, they are bland. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. It just, they really aren't offering that much.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's been great to hear your perspective. I think what we've been focused on is really trying to understand the proper balance between risk and growth, setting the right environment within a company that's set, I think we agreed, by management, and having the proper controls in place from the board to review that performance is critically important. So TK, thank you for your insight today.
My pleasure.
And we look forward to seeing you again on This Week in the Boardroom. Thank you.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner Paul Weiss and contributing partners National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.